Okay, today's stuff we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Vav. A few announcements. So first of all, bookmarks. Don't forget to get your orders in. This is the last time I'll remind you because all the other shiurim were pre-recorded starting tomorrow. So get your orders in for your bookmarks ASAP. We have till Sunday. Secondly, right, again, bookmarks right there. You see them right there on every Masechet. There's a checklist in the back. There's key terms that would be helpful. So for the next Seder starting in September. Secondly, I'll be speaking at a bunch of places next week in New York and Los Angeles. So if you're interested, you can reach out to us for information if you haven't yet received information. Both you just need to register so that the hosts know that people are coming, like who's coming. What else? Beyond the DAF content throughout the summer, I will not be announcing in advance because I will not be up to date on what's going up and what's not. So I already pre-recorded. So basically look out. If you get the links, great. If not, you can go on our site or you can subscribe to the podcast Beyond the Daf, and then you can get the downloads will come automatically to your phone. So that's all the extra content. There will be a two-part series of Alana coming up that I know on Rabbi Meir Chayes L'Miuta and minorities, statistical minorities. So I'm just going to have a two-part series on that. So I can already tell you the next 2 weeks of Din and Daf are going to be on that. Okay, I don't believe there's not going to be a Din and Daf. Is there this week? I can't remember. But anyway, that's coming up. So let's go now to our topic. We're going to start with the shemen, the oil of the before that, I just remembered. Okay, today's stuff is sponsored by Doreen Samuels for the Shloshim for dear mother, Elaine Charlton, Elabat Rachmiel Viriva Leah, Zechrona Levracha, on the 23rd of July, 27th of Tammuz, 5785. She was so proud of my Jewish learning. Okay, we'll get started now about the oil of the Gentiles. So we have this issue of oil. And the question in the Mishnah had said that the oil of the Gentiles, as well as their bread, we dealt with the bread yesterday, was forbidden. But then it points out that Rabbi Yubeitino Itiru Hashem, and we're going to see it was really Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, who is the grandson of Rabbi. So Hashem and Shalahem, Shem. The question is, why was Shemin prohibited? Okay, today's going to be a day where we're going to have some machlokot, and we're going to have a lot of issues with a bunch of things that Rav says, and we're going to have to fine tune them to make them make sense. Okay, that's going to be the bulk of today's stuff. So the first is the statement of Rav. Rav Amar Daniel Gazar Alav. Ushmol Amar Lifatan Shel Kelim Tmeim Sartan. So they each have a different explanation of the Gzera. You might notice already if you follow the Hebrew at all, it's not exactly parallel. One says who made the Gzera, and the other one says why they made the Gzera. Okay, but the assumption is they disagree about both. Who made it and why they made it. So Rav says it was Daniel. Daniel from Sefer Daniel. Okay, he forbade it. Remember, Daniel ends up in Nebuchadnezzar's palace. And it was a good time to realize we need to institute Gzerot because he was living mostly in a Gentile community. So he forbade it, and the commentaries claim that he forbade it again, like the other things that we saw in the Mishnah, to basically prevent intermarriage. That was the idea. We don't want to intermarry. Why? If we intermarry, what will happen? Well, we'll end up being idol worshippers. So to avoid becoming idol worshippers, right? So it's intermarriage that leads to that, right? Not intermarriage in and of itself, it sounds like, but because it would lead to making us turn away from God, which is what the Torah says, by the way. Lo titchatem bam, don't marry them, so that they don't turn you away. Now we're going to get back to this. If it says in the Torah, then why are they forbidding it? It should be forbidden already before. We're going to get to that later. So Rav says it was Daniel who did it, and we'll get back to that. Shmuel says, Zlifatan shel kelim tmeim osartan. Shmuel says something which is going to be hard to understand. In the end, we're going to reject it and modify it. But zlifa is when you pour or like spritz, something like that. So when the zlifatan of the kelim tmeim, now what happened? The non-Jews would put the oil, their own oil, into their own vessels. And their own vessels were used for all sorts of things, and they were often impure because, first of all, Gentiles carry impurity. The rabbis made a gzerah about that. We're going to end our daf with that. The Gentiles carry impurity of azav. So that means all their vessels are impure, which means that if they put their oil into their vessels, their oils will become tamei because there's vessels now. This is kind of like kashrut. The vessels absorb what was in there. That then when you pour the oil in, the tuma that's sort of swallowed up like the way the wine was comes out into the vessel. Now, there's a few issues with this. Number one, that's not really the way tuma transfers. So that's number one. But the Gemara is going to ask a different question and thereby reject it. What we can't have their oil because what we all eat only pure things. The only issue for purity, first of all, right? There's kohanim. Kohanim have an issue with putting their truma or something, But we don't have a problem with people eating tamei stuff. Okay, it's not like it's not kosher. No such thing. It's not true. It's just it's impure. But there's no right. Some people like to eat things on like chulin b'tarad kodesh, but it doesn't make any sense. So Ella they change. Zlifatan shel kelim asurim o sartan. What does this mean? It's that their vessels absorbed non-kosher stuff, like we always say. I mean, right? They cook stuff in it, or right, and then it absorbs. When they put the oil in, it seeps out the flavor into the oil, just like we saw the wine comes out, the flavor comes into the oil. Now, this is a little bit strange because generally when we talk about kashrut, we talk about it with heat. There's no heat going on, you just pour oil in. So some people say it's the strength of the oil pulls in flavors, and the oil specifically is different than most other substances. You put water in it, you could drink the water. The water doesn't have the flavor of the non-kosher, but oil will pull out the flavor. That's one possibility. Some of the commentaries focus on this word lifatan, and they say specifically it's when they pour the oil in, because lifa is to pour. When they pour the oil in, it creates like again, it's not exactly clear, okay, but maybe pressure, maybe somehow the pouring in of it is what causes the flavor to come out. So we don't know exactly, but one of those possibilities. The main point being that Shmuel views this as a kashrut issue, and Rav views this as a concern for intermarriage and Avodah Zarah specifically, which, by the way, would differentiate if we really kept it strictly to idol worshippers, right? Rav would say only idol worshippers, where Shmuel would say any Gentiles, because it has to do with non-kosher, which would affect anybody. Amalei Shmuel Rav. So now we're going to start with a slew of questions on Rav, and as we go through these questions, we're going to have three difficulties. We're going to modify a little bit what Rav says. Amalei Shmuel Rav. Bishlama Ledidi. So the first question is asked by Shmuel himself. My opinion makes a lot of sense in light of what we're about to read. Hainu, this explains very well then, it fits in very well with Techiata Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta ve'amal, when Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta came, he said, Darash Rabbi Simlai b'nitzivim. Rabbi Simlai, this is, by the way, Babylonians talking about Israelis coming, right? When people came from Israel, they said, this Rav Yitzchak, Darash Rabbi Simlai b'nitzivim. He told us that Rabbi Simlai in Nitzivim said, Shemen, Rabbi Yehuda, it should be Rabbi Yehuda Nissia, this grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Ubeitino, nimnu alav v'hitichua. Kasaval, now the question is, why were Rabbi Yehuda Nissia and his court? Okay, this, by the way, was in our Mishnah. Could be that line in our Mishnah was added later, which makes sense if it's Rabbi Yehuda Nissia, because he was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi who put together the Mishnah. Could be it was an added sentence in there. Anyway, Kasaval, so let's try to figure out. Shmuel's saying, if it's because they forbade the flavor, right? The concern was the flavor coming out, the taste, coming out from the sides of the jugs into the oil. Kasaval, why did then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his court rule that it's okay? Well, Kasavar notein tam lifgam mutal, because they held if it gives bad taste, which usually happens after a whole day, 24 hours, right? If it hasn't been used in 24 hours, whatever taste is in there turns bad. And therefore, the taste is bad. Or the truth is, it could be also that they claim that it ruins, in oil, it's just bad to have some other flavor. And that's permitted. So they said, basically, we can permit this because they held notein tam lifgam is permitted. Not everybody holds that way, right? If it gives flavor, even if it's not good flavor, it could still be prohibited. So they permitted it based on that. But if you claim Daniel forbade this, we're going to have some problems because Daniel Gazal, how could Daniel forbid and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi comes along and permits? There's rules about repealing Zerot. How do you repeal a Gzeira de Rabbanan? Well, v'hatnan, here's a rule that comes up in the Mishnah in Eduyot. Ein beit din yachol levatel beit din chavero, ela im ken gadol himenu b'chochma u'v'minyan. You have to be greater in wisdom and in number. So let's just try to think about it. It's obvious to them that Daniel was greater than Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. Okay, they don't have to prove it. It's just kind of they take it as a given, and therefore there's no way that they could repeal Gzeira that Daniel instituted. Today's going to be a day where we're going to learn about how we repeal Gzeirot, because we specifically have a case where the Gzeira was repealed, and we can try to figure out. So this can't possibly be. So Rav, we're now stuck with a question against Rav. What's Rav's response? Now, the problem with Rav was the question against Rav was all based on, which Shmuel brought, the statement of Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta, who said that Darash Rabbi Simlai in Nitzibin, that Shem and Rabbi Yehuda Nasiu Beit Dino permitted. So comes Rav and he says, Amar le Simlai luda akamalta. You're questioning me from Simlai, the guy from Lod, and he's basically speaking about him in a very disparaging manner. Notice he cuts his Rabbi Toar, right? His Rabbi Simlai. Shani Luda'ayin Mizalzel, the people in Lod, or the guy from Lod, okay, maybe he's talking specifically about Rabbi Simlai, is Mizalzel. He doesn't take seriously the words of the rabbis, and therefore there was this rabbinic ordinance that he just decided to get rid of. But right, we don't go by that. Okay, we don't trust this guy. This guy doesn't care about rabbinic ordinances. Amarle, so Shmuel's response is, Eshlachle, do you want me to bring him? And okay, so this means either bring him before you and you can say that to his face, and let's see, right, what happens. Like, are you willing to say that in front of him? Or maybe he says, should we bring him and see if his testimony is really true? What, you think he was just making that up? Let's send for him and we'll see if he was really making it up, and we'll interrogate him. To which Ikasiv, Rabba was embarrassed. Okay, he realized he shouldn't have spoken that way so disparagingly about someone, and he feels bad. Okay, and he kind of seems to take back what he said. So comes Rav, and he says the following: Imheim lo darshu. So let's say he's right that Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya repealed the Gzeira. Still, Imheim lo darshu, ana lo darshinan. If they won't darshan the pasuk properly, we're not going to. In other words, maybe Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya repealed this, but he clearly made a mistake. Okay, because I don't think it should have been repealed, because look at the pasuk. And he's basically going to go back to Daniel. Now we're quoting Daniel. And now we're going to understand where on earth he got it from that Daniel created this Gzeira. V'haksiv, look at what it says in the pasuk. Vayasem Daniel alibo. That means Daniel took it to heart, or he took it upon himself. Asher lo yitga'al, he won't defile himself. Bepat bagamelech ubiyeh mishtav, by eating the bread of the king, and by drinking his wines. Notice wines are plural. So what does this mean? It sounds like he wouldn't eat the bread and wouldn't drink the wine. What does this have to do with oil? Well, notice it talks about two drinks. One is wine, one must be oil. So from there, Rav says, this is our proof that Daniel clearly did it. So you can tell me what you want, Rabbi Yehuda, no. But it seems pretty clear to me from the pasuk that Daniel forbade it. So now they're going to explain. Rav Saval, he held. Now we're going to see what the debate then. Why doesn't Shmuel think this? Alibo samu l'chol Yisrael hora. What does it mean, alibo? He took it to him for himself and for everybody else, right? And he taught what he did to all the Jewish people. Shmuel savar alibo samu l'chol Yisrael hora. It's sometimes people keep a higher standard for themselves. He kept himself to a higher standard while he was in the palace of the king. But it didn't mean told all the Jews not to do this. So there was no Gzeira according to Shmuel. And again, later they forbade it because of the kashrut issue. And according to Rav, Daniel Gazal. Okay, this is the first question we had against Rav, where how do you deal with this if Rebbe Ubeiti no, because Rebbe Yudah Nasiu Ubeiti no Bitlu, he says, well, I don't agree with them. But now we're going to have a problem. Okay, question number 2. We're going to have 3 questions on Rav. Shemen Daniel Gazal, Amar Bali, Amar Avimi Nivta'at, Mishmei de Rav. Notice, they're now going to quote something that Rav himself said. Pitan Vishamnam, their bread and their oils, Yenam, their wines, Ubunotehem, and their daughters, Kulam Mishmona Sal Davalchim. These are all part of the 18 famous gzerot that they all were gozer on one day. You might remember this is from Shabbat, the beginning of the Masechet. Remember there were these dapim that were all about impurity. They were impossible to understand. So on Daf Yud Daled to, I think it's Yud Zayin Yud Chet, there's 4 dapim all about these 18 things, that there was one day in the Beit Midrash where there were more students of Beit Shammai than Beit Hillel. They took a vote and they forbade all these things. Beit Shammai basically was able to outnumber Beit Hillel. And the institute, these gzerot that we're going to talk about, were very well accepted and very well, you can't really repeal them very easily. We'll get back to that because if not, then how did they repeal this? But okay, we'll get back there. So Rav himself says that this was part of Shmona Asar Davar, which means that what? It wasn't Daniel who did it. It was Hillel and Shamai who did it in the time of Hillel and Shamai, with the students of Hillel and Shamai. So maybe Daniel instituted this gezerah, but the people didn't accept it. And the students of Hillel and Shammai came and accepted it. But then why does Rav say Daniel Gazal? If Daniel's gezerah was never accepted, then there's no point to date it back to Daniel. He should date it back to Hillel and Shammai's students. Ella Daniel gazar alav ba'il va'atu'ina v'gazar afilu b'sadeh. Now they make a distinction, and like I said, we're going to fine tune Rav a little bit. Daniel made a gzera. You cannot drink their oil. You can't have their oil in the city, like yesterday we saw, right? Because in the city there's more of a concern. You see people all the time, more of a concern for intermarriage. Whereas in the fields, happens once in a while. You happen to be in the fields. We're going to allow the oil. Okay? And then came Hillel and Shammai, and they said, the students of Hillel and Shammai, and they said, no, even in the fields, we're going to forbid. Okay? So now we fine-tuned Rav a little bit. Third question. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, which again is Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, they were both Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. They just turned Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya's name into Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya to distinguish him from Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, but the Mitzvah seems to be confused. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, well, now we're back to the question. Okay, we asked it with Daniel. We're going to ask it again with Hillel and Shammai. How could they repeal a gzerah that was done by Hillel, by the students of Hillel and Shammai? They seem to think the students were also that way. Okay? Yeah, and yes, by the way, I thought I mentioned it, but the field distinction, city field, was the same distinction we made yesterday with the bread. So now we assume that Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya was not the level of the students of Hillel and Shammai. So how could they undo the gzerah? Ve'od, and a further question, Hama Rabba Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan, Bakol Yachol Vatel Beitin, Divrei Beitin Chavero, Chutz Mishmona Asar Davar. In the case where the Beitin can repeal, let's just assume, let's say they could. We have a separate problem, which is any gzerah can be repealed other than the 18 things. Those cannot be repealed. Okay. And here we're going to go even farther. Sha'afilu, what Rabbi Yochanan was quoted as saying, Afilu yavo Eliyahu beitino en shomim lo. Even if Eliyahu and Avi came and his court, I don't know Eliyahu had a court, but assuming he had a court, if he and his court would come, they also couldn't repeal it. Okay. So how could you have repealed it? What's the reason why you can't just repeal gzerah, and you can't repeal gzerah of the Shmona Asar Davar? It's because it was a well-accepted gzerah. Okay, it spread everywhere. But shemen lo pashat isuro b'rov Yisrael. But shemen was different. Shemen, this gzerah did not. It just wasn't effective. People didn't keep it. Now, this is a fascinating thing, the way it works with gzerot. As soon as many people don't keep a gzerah, it already means that it's much easier to get rid of. This is why kitniot is very hard to get rid of, because it was something that at a certain point, it had spread to all the communities, at least in the Ashkenazi world, it had spread to all those communities. And therefore, and it talks about in the sources a lot, the pashat yisuro, and because of that, they couldn't repeal it. Okay, that's like a big consideration. So they say the oil was never well accepted. How do we know this? So they say, Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. They again quote Rabbi Yochanan. Yeshvu Rabotenu badku al shemen shelo pashat yisro b'Rav Yisrael. He says, number one, we see that Rabbi Yochanan says they checked it out, and many people were still buying oil of the Gentiles. V'samchu rabotenu al divrei Rav and Shmuel ben Gamliel al divrei Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok. Now we quote two other people who quoted Shayu Omrim, Ein gozrim zera l'tzibur ela im ken rov hatzibur yicholim la'amod ba. Okay, another issue. We don't institute a gzera if people can't handle it. Now, obviously, if people weren't keeping it, it means that people couldn't handle it, which means that's why of the 18 things, this one could be repealed because it didn't have the same criteria as all the others, that they were well accepted gzerot and therefore couldn't be repealed. This was not well accepted, and it fits the criteria of it's something people can't handle. Because people can't handle it, we don't make a gzera, and not only we go even farther. Not only do we not make a gzera, but we can actually repeal a gzera. Okay. Now, the Amar of Adbar Ava Mikra. What's the pasuk? By the way, I mentioned this Tosfot yesterday. Tosfot, when he says why, he tries to justify why bread is permitted, he uses all these issues. It's a gzera that the tzibor can't handle. It wasn't Pashat Yisuro. Okay, and he claims that because look at the stories we saw yesterday where you see people thought that it was permitted. So that he uses all those as his in his arsenal basically to try to prove why pot should be permitted. Now, the Amar of Adbar Ava Mikra. Where do we have a pasuk that talks about this concept? Okay, we're going to see what concept in a minute. That about if it doesn't spread to everybody, we can get rid of it more easily. Turning out on a bet, B'me'era atem ne'arim, by the curse you are cursed. Voti atem kovim, and you steal from me. Hagoy kulo, the whole nation. So how does Rashi explain this? Or Rashi explains what the Gemara is trying to say here. B'me'era atem ne'arim, this few stages in this pasuk. Atem kablim alechem gzera ba'arur u'biklala. You accept upon yourselves a gzera to be cursed. In other words, cursed is the person who doesn't keep this ordinance of the rabbis. And then otiatem kovim, and then you steal from me, which means you don't go with the gzera, okay? And then it says, right, that you basically benefit from the things you were forbidden to do. Hagoy kulo, the whole nation. I kagoy kulo in, ilo lo. When will you be cursed? If the whole nation goes against it. But if not, if the whole nation, in other words, what they're saying here is, hagoy kulo means if the whole nation accepted it. If the whole nation doesn't accept it, then you're not going to be cursed for not keeping it. Okay. Gufa. So that was, just to review before we move on, 3 difficulties on Rav. Okay, we have a machloket, Rav and Shmuel. Why this was instituted, Shmuel says because we're worried about non-kosher food, non-kosher taste being mixed in, which then is repealed because they said, oh, it gives bad flavor. Because it gives bad flavor, it's going to be permitted. Then we have, on the other hand, Rav, who says it's all from Daniel Gazar, which then we had to say, well, it wasn't really Daniel. Yes, he started it. He forbade it in the city. Came the students of Hillel and Shamai, forbade it in the fields as well. Then the rabbi said, look, this is not a well-accepted. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya says this wasn't a well-accepted, even though it was part of the Shmona Asar Davar of Hillel and Shamai. They're able to repeal it because it wasn't widely accepted. Gufa. Now we go into this statement that we quoted of Rav before, and then we're going to continue with difficulties on Rav based on this statement. Amar Bali, Amar Avimi Nivta'at Mishmei de Rav. Pitan v'shamnam yenanu b'notehem kulam mishmona asar davar. So now we go back to him saying the bread, the wine, the bread, the oil, the wine, and their daughters are all forbidden because as part of these 18 gzerot. B'notehen mahi. What is this b'notehen? Their daughters are forbidden. What does it mean their daughters are forbidden? So we're going to have 2 explanations. Am Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, gazru al benotehem nidot me'arisotan. They declared that all females, from the moment they're born, okay, arisotan is like in their cradles, they're going to have the impurity of a nida. Okay? Rabbis declared impurity of a nida on every woman, even though, right, babies don't menstruate. But if they declare their nida, then they're going to, if we touch, right, they touch us, we become tameh. So it's going to keep us away from them. It's a good way to distance us from the Gentiles. So that's the gzera of nida. But we have a different explanation, okay? And the rest of the sugya is going to go with the other explanation. This stands alone. This is a standalone. It's an option. But geneva mishmei de Rav, and that's why we're going to get back to Rav again. Geneva, in the name of Rav, explained It was all about not intermarrying so that they don't cause us to worship idols. Okay, because when Rav Ada came from Israel, he said in the name of Rav Yitzchak, Gazru al pitam mishum shamna. They declared that their bread is going to be forbidden because of their oil. Don't eat bread so that you don't come to eat their oil. Well, my shemen depat. Okay, they're going to stop for a minute in the middle of this statement and say something doesn't make sense about this, right? Shemen, right? It makes it sound in the hierarchy of things that shemen is worse than bread. And by the way, it shouldn't be worse than bread because in the end they permitted the oil and they kept the pot, even though, right, we maybe saw ways to permit pot, but overall the bread of akum is forbidden. So it doesn't make any sense. Ela al pitan vishamna mishum. They forbade two things on account of not drinking their wine. We don't want you to drink the wine of Gentiles because that much more so leads to chatanut, having drinks with people. But because of that, they forbade the bread and the oil so that you don't come to drink the wine. So they're on the same level, really. And then the wine is, okay, we're continuing with this statement because we had to stop in the middle to explain something or clarify and then change a little bit, edit. And the wine you can't drink so that you don't intermarry. Why can't you intermarry? Well, mishum davar achir. What is davar achir? Avodah Zarah. If you intermarry, the daughters will sway the husbands to worship idols. And this is also on account of something else. Okay, we'll talk about what that something else is at the end of today's daf. So now the Gemara has a big question here. But how could you say the gzeras don't intermarry? It says in the Torah you're not allowed to marry people from the other nations, right? It says lo titchatem bam. Okay, bitcha lo titen lebino, bito lo titen lebincha, right? Don't intermarry in either direction. So how do you explain that there's a gzera on this when the Torah already forbids it? To which they answer, Doraita shiva goyim, aval shar mot lo. And that was the pasuk in Dvarim when it was talking about not intermarrying the people when you get into the land of Israel. That means the 7 nations that are living in the land, because they're all, right, number one, idol worshippers. Number 2, they're involved in terrible things, right? They were known to be people that were really terrible sinners, and therefore it was forbidden to intermarry with them. But atu inu begazer afilu deshar umot. Okay, and the gzera was even the other nations. So that's one track. We now have 2 tracks. Okay, let's just go back so that we get this stuff straight because now we're going to go off on a different track. We have why are bnotei asurim? What does it mean? We explained. Number 1, it could mean that their daughters are nidot from when the time they're born, and they carry that with them for the rest of their lives. Option 2 is you can't marry them because you'll come to worship Avodah Zarah and something else. That's option 2. Within option 2, we're now going to have 2 tracks because the Torah already forbade that. So we're going to say track 1 is the Torah forbade the 7 nations. They forbade everybody else. Okay, that's one option. However, that doesn't work according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And then we're going to start a whole new track according to him, and it's going to take us a while to fine-tune it till we get it right. That's why I wanted to set it all up in tracks so you understand. So now we're going to say Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Amal. The pasuk after don't marry them, even though the context really was the 7 nations, but then it says, and that they won't turn you away from God. Now, any non-Jew basically could turn you away from God. So lirabot kol mesirot means it's forbidden by Torah law to marry anyone who doesn't believe in God, basically, okay? So now we're going to have that's already forbidden by Torah law. So according to him, how are you going to explain the Zerah, benotehen, which obviously means benot, right? It's not marrying Gentile women, which is already all included in the prohibition of the Torah. You don't need to make a Zerah on something that says in the Torah. So now we're going to suggest a whole bunch of things, and each time we're going to have a problem, we're going to have to fine-tune it. Eladoraita ishut derech chatanut, va'atu inu or gazer afilu derech znut. So according to this, the option 1 is by Torah law, you can't marry them. It says lo titchaten, but it doesn't say you can't have relations with them outside of marriage. Came the rabbis and said you can't engage in intercourse with them at all. Okay, even derech znut, right, through prostitution or something. Znut nami bebeitin shel shem gazru. That can't work because that was forbidden. Okay, now we're going to go through. It wasn't forbidden by Torah. Well, it wasn't forbidden. It was actually forbidden before the Torah even existed. How do we know this? Okay, Beit Din Shel Shem, right? Shem and Eber were in the time of the forefathers. Dichtiv Vayomer Yehuda Hotziua v'tisaref. When he thinks that Tamar is engaged in prostitution, right, because he sees that she's pregnant and he doesn't realize it was from him, he says, take her out and she should be burned. And what do you see here? There was Tamar, who was presumably, right, part of the Jewish community, whatever community there was then. And she obviously, according to him, engaged in prostitution with somebody from outside the religion, and she gets killed. So what do you see here? Even derech znut, she wasn't married to them, it was forbidden. Okay, so it can't be that. Ela deoraita goy haba bat Yisrael. Now notice, it's a different order. This was benotehen, the Gentile daughters. The story of Tamar, she was a Jew, and the person she engaged in relations was a Gentile. So now they say, this plays to a particular stereotype, goy haba bat Yisrael demashcha batre. By Torah law, it's a woman who's Jewish can't engage in relations with a Gentile man because men are generally more forceful and they'll pull the woman away. Or maybe you could say the woman's more loyal. Maybe she'll engage in prostitution once, but she'll be pulled away by him. Okay, women maybe are, pulled away more easily. Again, these are all just stereotypes. Aval Yisrael habala goya lo. But a Jew who engages in relations with a Gentile woman in a case of, let's say, prostitution, he'll go once and that's it. He's not going to get connected with her and be swayed by her to go engage him, to go engage in idol worship and stick with her for the long term. And what was this Zarah of the Shmonasar Davar of the students of Hillel and Shamai? Even in the direction of a Yisrael and that's why it's called Benotean. But the problem is this: Yisrael habala goya l'chala Moshe misinai. That was already forbidden. Halacha l'Moshe misinai. Before this predates the Hillel and Shamai. Damar mar, from the parsha last week, habol arami kanaim pogim bo. Right, the Pinchas story, and this comes from the Pinchas story. Someone who engages in relations with an Aramean, Kanaim, can just come and kill the person right away, like Pinchas did. So what do you see here? That it was already forbidden to do that. That was Zimri and Cosby, right? He was a man, a Jewish man. She was a Gentile woman. It was nude. It wasn't a marriage situation. And yet it was forbidden, and Pinchas was allowed to kill him. And this is the halacha. It's halacha l'Moshe Messina. So he says, okay, deoraita for hestia they say by Torah law, what they forbid, someone can just come and kill them. That, right, doesn't have to be brought to court. That's the whole point. You could do it right there, then and there. That is only if it was done in public, because if it was done in public, like the Maaseh Shaya, exactly like the Zimri Cosby story. So that we can say you can do it, right? You can kill by halacha l'Moshe Missinai, and because it's forbidden. But it's not forbidden to do it in the privacy of your own home. That wasn't forbidden at that point. So only later, in the time of Hillel and Shamai, did they forbid that. B'tzina. Atu inor gazar afilu b'tzina. So they came and said even privately. But that doesn't work either, okay? I told you, it's going to be long till we figure out exactly what it was. B'tzina nami b'tin shel cheshmonai kashrut. The court of the Cheshmonaim, which at the time the Cheshmonaim was before Hillel and Shamai. How do we know? Well, Yisrael habala goya chaya mishum nashka. It said a Jew who engages in relations with a goya, okay, in znut, right? This is just engaging in relations, is chayav because of on 4 accounts. Number 1, nun nida, she's a nida. Number 2, she's a shifcha. You're not allowed to have relations with a shifcha. A shifcha Kanani, a non-Jewish maidservant. Gimel goya, because she's not Jewish. And Aleph eshet ish. Also, a married woman, there's Isur Eshet Ish, even of non-Jews, right? Even though their marriage isn't betrothal halachically, but they were gosim. Ki ata Ravin amal mishum nashkaz. But when Ravin came, he said it was nashkaz, not nashka. So the first 3 are the same, nida, shifcha, goya. But what's the zayin? Znut. Also because, or zona. Okay, also on account of prostitution, meaning not only Eshet Ish, not even if she's a non-married woman, and not even if it's marriage, but it's also forbidden mishum znut. So now we see that they already forbade the man, right, Jewish man with Gentile woman, also from the Gzerat Cheshmonaim, even Bitsina, even if it was private. Okay, so that doesn't work. Ki gazru, so now they're going to try another one. Ki gazru beit dino shel Cheshmonai bi'a, aval yichud lo. They forbade relations. Okay, that's what we've been talking about the whole time. But now we're going to switch and say what they didn't forbid, the Cheshmonaim, was yichud. Going into a secluded place with a woman is also forbidden, and that was forbidden by Hillel and Shamai. So now we're going to learn that benotehem means don't be secluded with a Gentile woman. Right? So yichud wasn't yet, and then their gzera was yichud. Yichudami, beitino shel David gazlu, but that's not going to work either because David already they forbid seclusion. Tamar Rav Yehuda ba'otasha agazlu ala yichud. What's otasha? After the Amnon and Tamar story, where basically he rapes her, and they then said, "Oh, we have to forbid yichud." So seclusion. So now they say, Amre, Hatam Yichud B'Bait Yisrael, Aval Yichud Goya Lo. That's not a problem because that was Yichud with a Jewish man and a Jewish woman. What this was forbidding is seclusion with a Gentile woman and a Jewish man. And that, in the end, is the answer according to this track. Remember, okay, let's go back and summarize. We have track one this has nothing to do with any of what we just talked about. This Gzera had to do with their nida. It goes there that they're going to be all considered nidot. It's nothing to do with marriage. The second is, now you could say it's to prevent marriage, to prevent interaction, all that, but it's not about marriage. The second is it's to forbid them for marriage purposes. Either the Torah forbade only the 7 nations, and this Gzera came to forbid everybody else. That's one track. The other track is to say it actually, benotehem, means you can't be secluded with a non-Jewish woman. That was what it came to say. Okay, so it took a long time to get there, but that's the conclusion. Now the Gemara has a bit of a problem on the last point about the David ubeit dino. It's a side issue because it's not even our issue. David ubeit dino gazru al hayichud. So now they're going to say the yichud debat Yisrael doraita. But isn't yichud of Yisrael Torah law, and not, you can't say David ubeit dino gazru. So now they say the Amar. How do we know? The Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishmar B'Shem Ben Yotzadak. Remez liyichud min Torah minayim. We learned this already. It's a very strange drasha. Shene'emar ki yisitcha achicha ben imecha. The pasuk of a masid, of someone who sways someone else to do worship idols, it says if your brother, the son of your mother, says, "Come, let's worship idols," and that's how they introduced the case of the masid. Even though obviously it could be anybody, but they bring an example. So they ask the question, the obvious question, ben mesit, ben em mesit, u ben avino mesit. Why did it say specifically ben imecha? Could have said ben avicha, right? The son, brothers through the father are not going to sway one the other. Of course, they're all going to sway in the same way. So why specifically do they say ben imecha? Must be to teach us something else. Ela ben mityached imimo, ve'en acher mityached im kol harayot shebetorah. It's actually permitted. Okay, it's forbidden to do yichud with anyone who's forbidden to you as an isur or rayot, except for a son with his mother. A son with his mother, you can be alone in a secluded area. And now they're going to say the following. That means that the two sons could live together with only the mother, and it's not a yichud issue. And that's really what we're learning from here. And that's why it ended up that these two brothers were the sons of their mother, because they were alone together, because there's no problem to be alone with just the mother and the sons. Because there's no problem with yichud of the sons with the mother, even though all other arayot are forbidden. That's basically what it's saying. It's a bit of a out there drasha. But this shows source for yichud from the Torah. So what do you mean, David ubeit dino gazru, when it says it in the Torah? So now they say, yichud de'oraita de'eshet ish. The yichud of the Torah is eshet ish, or, any isur arayot, like we said, right? Eshet ish is one of the arayot, or, other arayot, like uncle, things like that are arayot. Actually, uncle is not a rayot, but all the other arayot. Ve'ata David v'gazer afilu hayichud depnuya. Right? Amnon v'Tamar, she wasn't married, so he forbade yichud of an unmarried woman, which isn't isur arayot, to have relations with her, but because she's not married, and to him, right, they shouldn't engage in relations, so he forbade seclusion as well. Okay, so that's the seclusion he forbade. And then now we're going to just go back and summarize. So Torah law, seclusion with anyone Isur Arayot, and any married woman, that's also Isur Arayot. Davi came Yichud de Pnuya. And then, Atu Talmidei Shamai Beit Hillel, V'gaz Rafilo Yichud de Goya. And then they came and said not only a Jewish single woman, but even a Gentile woman. Okay? And that's again, this was all one possible track. It's not necessarily the only way to understand it, but according to Rabbi Shimon Yochai, this is the only way to explain Rav's opinion, okay? Through Rav's explanation. Or really, it was also Rabbi Yitzchak who said, Al Pita Mishum Shamnan, and then that's all Mishum Benotehen. Okay, now we're going to get back to this Davar Acher, and with this we'll finish. Ma'al Davar Acher Mishum Davar Acher. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Gazru al Tinok Ovei Kochavim, Sheyitamei Beziva. Okay, this is like the way they said about the women, that they're going to be nidot from the time they're born. They also said that all males are going to be called zav. They're going to have the tumah of a zav, which again, touching and all sorts of other things are going to create impurity, and that's going to keep people away from them. Why? Okay, we don't want any of ours being near theirs, because the concern is that they engaged in homosexual relations and that they would, rape our children possibly, or engage in relations with our children consensually, whatever it might be. But there was a concern for this, and therefore they declared all males were going to be zav, and that way we'll keep away from them. So that all the women nidot, that's the benotehem, and that's because also, again, mishum davar acher, because of avodah zarah, and also they would go there on the males because of mishkav zachor. It was another thing they were worried about. To Amar Rabbi Zera, Tsar Gadol Hayali Yetzer Rabbi Asi. And now we're going to see the statement Rabbi Zera said. I was very distressed about this. Then I asked Rabbi Asi. He didn't know. We haven't yet found out what it was. But Rabbi Asi Yetzer Rabbi Yochanan, and he asked Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Yetzer Rabbi Yanai. Nobody knew how to answer this question. Rabbi Yanai Yetzer Rabbi Natan ben Amram. I'm giving a big intro to this question. That you're going to say, really, that's what they were so concerned about. But we'll see. For Rabbi Natan ben Amram Yetzer Rabbi. From what age did they determine that the male children are all going to be considered tumah of zav? Amarli ben yomo. And Rebbe said, from the day they're born. Okay, they're 1 day old, they're already zav. It's just like we said about the girls. Ukeshabati etza Rabbi Chia. But then, okay, this whole thing was said by Rabbi Zera. So it was asked, I asked to them, who asked to them, we got back up to Rebbe. And then when I saw Rabbi Chia, Amarli, he gave me a different answer. Ben tesha shanim v'yom echad, when they're 9 years and a day. As we've seen before, is the age that males are considered potentials to engage in sexual relations, like sexually mature, you could say. Ukeshabati v'ertzeti dvarai lefnei Rebbe. And then Rabbi Zera says, when I got back in front of Rebbe and I told him what Rabbi Chia said, Amarli hanach dvarai v'echos divrei Rabbi Chia. You know what? I changed my mind. I think Rabbi Chia is right, and it's not from a day old. Right? It's nice when rabbis admit, or anybody admits, they were wrong. Because he says it's 9 years and a day. Because the whole issue is mishkav zachol, which is only going to be an issue once they can be sexually active. So therefore, the age is going to be 9, okay, and not right away. We're going to go back then to the girls. And why is the girls from birth? We'll get back to that and possibly change that as well. That's where we'll start in tomorrow's stuff. So what did we do today? Basically, we had 2 explanations for why there were gozer on the shemen. All that had to be understood in the context of how did then Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya Ubeit Dino nullify it. We had the 2 approaches. We had a bit of an issue with Rav. We had to fine tune Rav until we really understood properly. Even Shmuel, we also had to change a little bit. But Rav, there were 3 questions on him till we finally got to exactly how he understood it. From there, we got into this other statement he said, which is the wine and the oil. I'm sorry, the bread and the oil was because of the wine, and the wine because of the daughters, and the daughters because of something else, and something else because of something else, right? It was all Avodah Zarah and Mishkav Zachol. And then we said basically that the Benotehem, we had to figure out what does he mean by Benotehem, and we had different possibilities of how to understand that. In the end, there was kind of 2 possibilities, but within the second possibility, there were 2 different tracks of how to understand what it meant. Did it mean marrying them? Or did it mean being secluded with them? Okay, and then we had to understand all the different stages of the other things that we saw that this were already forbidden and how that all fits in. With that, we finished for today, and then we just ended off with what was the davar acher, right? The first davar acher was clearly idol worship. What was the second one, which we said that the males are matame ziva, and then we had the whole question about from what age. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day. For those who I'm used to seeing every day and I won't see for the next month, so have a good month. And I'll see you when we get back.